Hi everyone, welcome to Top 10 Middle Game Ideas number 8, the pawn break. To kick this off, let's put a pawn break on the board. Suppose white plays e4 and black goes for the French defense, and white chooses to play the advanced variation. The most natural move here, the most common move here, is actually to play the move c5, and that is a pawn break. So this is what we mean. It's when you push this pawn forward to challenge one of your opponent's pawns, and your opponent's pawn cannot move forward. So this presents a choice to your opponent. He could either defend the pawn where it is, maintain the tension between the pawns, or he can take. But either way, black can force some kind of opening of the position. So for example, if white takes, black can take back, and now this c-file is half open. Black has managed to create a half open c-file. Let's back up. So suppose white doesn't want that and it just defends the pawn. Can defend with a piece. Well, it was already defended, so he just plays a developing move. Then black can take, and once again there is a half open c-file. It doesn't matter how white takes back. Black has that half open c-file. So that is a pawn break. Let's back up. I want to contrast this to another line. Suppose white starts with d4 and black plays c5, going for a Benoni. The most common move here for white is not to take or to maintain the pawn there, but to push. And this is an option that is missing when there's a pawn break. This is not a pawn break because white can push by, and there's no opening of the position. The position is still closed. There's a pawn on every file, so that's a closed position. So the pawn break happens only in this case when your opponent's pawn can't move forward. You can play a pawn break and you can force some kind of exchange. Now black actually has a third choice here besides opening things up or maintaining the tension. Black can also push. Let's see, say white defends, black can push. And sometimes this is a useful way to play. I'm not saying that's the wrong move, but that's usually not the idea of the pawn break. Especially when you use the term pawn break, you're usually implying that the side that plays the break is trying to open up the position in some way. So let's look at the options for both sides after the break is played. Right here, as I said, white has two basic choices. White can either take or white can defend the pawn. If white takes, it does help black develop, but there's some pros here as well for white. For one thing, this square is now available for a piece. So maybe at some point white can manage to get a knight to this square, or maybe a bishop, and it can't be chased away by a pawn because that pawn was already used up in the break. So this knight will be pretty stable on that square. So it's a double-edged thing. Sometimes you want to take, sometimes you don't. It did weaken this pawn a bit, so you have to worry about that as well. So that's one choice for white. The second choice is to maintain the tension here by just defending the pawn. And then there's two basic ways to defend. You can defend with a piece. It's already defended actually, but you can develop and continue to defend, add to the defense of it. Or you could defend with a pawn, and this gives you a different option here. So you can now take back with a pawn if you choose to defend with a pawn, and you get this fully open file. Maybe you want to have this file too. These pawn breaks are not necessarily advantageous to one side or the other. They're just an opportunity to change the structure. This way white has created a structure where there's a completely open file, and he's got a pawn here, so this pawn on e5 continues to be well supported. On the other hand, this pawn on d4 is somewhat weak, and black can look to maybe try and get some pressure against it. So those are kind of the pros and cons. Now let's look at this from black's point of view. Well, if white takes, black will certainly take back. So let's say white decides to maintain the tension in one way or another. In this position, black is not forced to take either. Black can also maintain the tension. maybe increase the pressure on this pawn. This is the kind of move you might play if you want to open the file, but you'd really prefer your opponent take so that you get to develop a piece. So you just add to the pressure on this file and see if you can force your opponent to take. Of course, your opponent can continue to defend. It's not a cut and dried case. So those are your basic options for the side that plays the break and for the side that plays against it. There are also sometimes, say black didn't play the break right away, but played some developing move. If white plays a move like this, so he's got two pawns looking at the square where the pawn break would occur. This is called clamping down on the pawn break. And if white wants to have a closed position, or at least to keep the position closed on the queen side, this is a way that white might consider playing. Another option here, well, from this position, black could actually try and still force this pawn break by pushing this pawn up and this pawn up, maybe bringing another piece out to support it. So it's not all over in terms of having a pawn break there, but it gets a little more cumbersome. Also, playing a move like b6 there, after b6, white could consider pushing on with b5 and just stopping that pawn break from happening by taking en passant. So there are ways to prevent pawn breaks. You can try and play against them, and there are ways to force the pawn breaks through sometimes. Let's go back. I was looking at this line. Sometimes you want to prepare the pawn break as well. So say you don't play that move right away, but you start with b6, and black just kind of ignores what you're doing, and then you play the pawn break. The advantage of this kind of setup is that now when white takes, let's see, I just played a move, so it's white's turn. If white takes, you can take back with the pawn, and you have control over all these squares. You no longer have the half-open C file, but you have a half-open B file instead, and you have strong center influence. You don't give your opponent the opportunity to place a piece here in the center. So that's another way you can utilize a pawn break. And once again, if white doesn't go for the exchange right away, you can try and force him to take by, let's see, it's white's turn here. You can try and force him to take by piling up pressure on that pawn and seeing if you can make that happen. Not always easy to do that, but that's an idea there. Okay, so that's a little overview of the pawn break. I wanted to show an example from a game here. This game was played in Moscow in 1955 at the USA-Russia match. With the white pieces we have I.A. Horowitz, and with the black pieces we have Tigran Petrosian. Now Horowitz was quite a strong player at the time, although he's more known today for his chess books, but one of the top US players. And Tigran Petrosian, he was not yet world champion. That would be in the next decade. But he was also a rising young star on the Soviet team and one of the top players for them as well. So we have two strong players going at it here. Horowitz starts off with d4, and Petrosian plays an early c5, indicating that he's going for Benoni. And as I mentioned before, this is not a pawn break because white can just push past, and that's what white does. And now Petrosian plays e5. So this indicates that he's going for a check Benoni, which is kind of an interesting system. If you haven't seen it before, the center typically locks up completely. So all three pawns here have nowhere to go. They're all running into their compatriots. White has a little more room, but black has these pawn breaks available here and here, and white has pawn breaks available as well. So there's actually 4 pawn breaks in this position, and we'll watch through the game and see how both players take advantage of those breaks. So, but first they don't play them immediately. They continue developing for a while, both sides fianchetto. So both sides are playing in a pretty similar fashion. Here we see maybe the first difference. this knight comes out in front of the king, whereas this knight moves to the side. But notice that in both cases, the knights have been moved out of the way of the f-pawns, so that these pawn breaks are playable at this point. Let's see, white castles. Black continues developing, white develops, and now the pawn break is played. So this is the first pawn break in this game, and white is faced with an interesting choice. So usually there's kind of two choices: to defend the pawn or to take. Just defending is maybe not so good here because there's a threat of this pawn pushing, hitting the bishop, and then pushing again and forking these two pieces. And notice that even if the bishop trades off that pawn, this pawn can take back, and there's still that fork threat. So it's actually not good to let that pawn come forward. But in this case, white has another choice. This is, I don't know, if you call defending the pawn maintaining the tension, there's also the choice of pushing the pawn, blockading the pawn, white pushes his f-pawn forward, and this is increasing the tension. Now we have two sets of pawns that might be traded off. Actually, the chess engine did not really like that. It preferred taking. That was his first choice. And after this exchange, it's interesting that black is using this g-pawn here to take back. And I mentioned this, sometimes you want to support your pawn break with a neighboring pawn so that you get control over these squares when the pawn takes back. And then the chess engine would just play f3 here, just kind of holding on to the position. It looks like black is a little better, but it seems like white is okay there as well. Another way to play this is, well, notice the pawn is actually defended, so you don't really need to do anything more to defend. Another idea here was to play queen to c1. So with the queen and the bishop on this as a battery, white could actually stop the pawn from coming forward, and that seems to be okay as well. Anyway, let's go on with the game. White played f4, and then Petrosian took in this direction first. So we get this exchange, and white does get to locate a piece on this square, so that seems good for white. But black also gets a piece. He can bring his knight into the center, so both sides are getting something in this exchange. Now Horowitz played queen e2. Oops, sorry. Queen to e2. And Petrosian went with a6. Maybe this was intended to keep the knight out of this square. Maybe it's intended to prepare b4. Sometimes you might want to put the rook over here, push this pawn forward, and get that break going on this side as well. We'll just have to wait and see. So the game continued, bishop h3, increasing the pressure. We still have the tension in the center between these two pawns, the original pawn break, and we have the bishops looking at each other through the pawn. Bishop to d7 was played. I suppose if this diagonal opens up, Petrosian is wanting to take back with the queen here, maybe bring the rook over here, get the bishop out of the way. So after bishop d7, Horowitz decided to take immediately, and Petrosian takes back with a pawn. So this is not quite the same as the situation I was talking about earlier with two pawns in a row controlling a lot of squares. This is just a single pawn here. In fact, it looks like black has weakened his structure a little bit, but on the other hand, he has a lot of pieces around the king, and the pawn breaks have accomplished their purpose, I would say, in opening up lines for the pieces. So both sides have some play here. Let's see, the game continued. Rook to e1 to the center. The queen steps over to e8. Not afraid of putting the queen. Not afraid of putting the queen in this line, but the queen is going to move away from there pretty soon anyway. So Horowitz starts maneuvering his knight around, and Petrosian brings the queen up. And actually, this is starting to look pretty good for black. Maybe white's maneuvers are just a bit slow here. So the queen stepped away from that pin here, and it's looking at this pawn on f5. Black's queen goes over to h5, hitting the bishop, and then lifting the rook up. So black is clearly building up for a kingside attack, and this is possible because of the pawn exchanges, because of these open lines. So that's enabled this whole line of play. And white is starting to feel a bit nervous and tries to go for counterplay here. And maybe this is a mistake, but it's just interesting to see how these players take advantage of the pawn breaks. He once again pushes this pushes a pawn forward to play a pawn break. He's pushing the b pawn in this case, and Petrosian decides to defend. So he defends with a pawn, and that's because he doesn't want this pawn to get pulled out of the way. This pawn in these Benoni structures is a key defender, and so you don't generally want to give that up or allow it to be pulled away. That would, for one thing, it would allow this pawn to come through. So he defended with his own b pawn, and white takes, black takes back, and the queen comes over to the b file. So hoping to come in maybe and cause some trouble on the queen side, trying to get counterplay. But it actually looks a bit like a forlorn hope. Although this rook is loose here, so queen here would be pinning the bishop. It doesn't seem to be that strong. So let's see, rook f to e8. Well, that takes care of that rook being loose. Sorry, I did the wrong move there. Rook f to e8. Yeah, it doubles the rook on the e file. Makes sense. Put the rooks on the open file and double them. And it also protected this rook, so there's no longer a pin here for the queen to exploit. Knight to c2, a5, and h3. So h3 seems to be a bit weakening here on the king side. After this, it seems to be pretty good for black, this position. There was maybe a slight edge before, and now it's becoming dominant. So that's part of this chasing the queen away. Actually, the chess engine in this position was recommending playing instead of h3. The chess engine was recommending playing a4 to just blockade that pawn and just kind of hold things in this position. Anyway, in this position, h3 was played, and a4 to kick the queen. The queen does come in, looking at this weakness here in the camp, the key point. Black's queen comes back to defend. Petrosian can't let that go now. His attack is not yet that strong, but it is starting to look kind of promising here. The queen goes to a6, looking at the a pawn here while keeping pressure on the center. Now bishop to h6, looking to trade off the bishop maybe, and the king goes to h1. And Horowitz goes for, Petrosian goes for the trade. The trade opens up this line for the queen here. Knight goes to d3, hitting the rook, and maybe with ideas of pressure on this pawn, maybe the queen can come over and add to that. But it's hitting the rook immediately. So, and also the battery, opening up the battery. So there's an exchange here. Queen goes to a5. So I guess the queen is just looking to find a way back into the game to defend. This bishop here might get kind of lonely if the knight goes after it. It's already under pressure from the queen. Although, of course, you have to be careful about backfire here. The queen and the king are on a line there. You have to be able to calculate this out pretty precisely. Anyway, after queen a5, Petrosian plays the move rook e2. Aggressively going in with his rook. And also there was, if we back up one move, there was already this threat that after the trade this rook was once again loose, and the queen on a5, in addition to looking back to defend, was also threatening a check and take rook. So that had to be dealt with as well. So rook to e2 gets the rook out of danger and makes a threat. White throws in a check, so he decides to go this way to get back, to make the queen relevant again instead of coming back this way. The rook was controlling all of these squares, so it would have been hard for the queen to do much there. Well, maybe c3 was possible. Anyway, queen d8 was played. The bishop drops down. Petrosian's not interested in retreating his rook. The queen defends the bishop there. The queen is still defending this pawn on e6, and white's queen is looking like it's not doing too much. Bishop to f3 was played, hitting the rook and also opening up rook g1 to take advantage of this of this opportunity here, skewering the queen and the king. So in this position, Petrosian played the very cool move, rook takes knight, just ignoring all of these threats, but he has deadly threats of his own. So for example, if rook to g1 is played here, this wasn't played, but it's probably what he had calculated. Then there's this nice sequence here with the knight. The knight comes in here and gives a check. The king has to move and has only one move. And then the knight comes here with a double check, so a double discovered check. And the king can't go back because the rook will come over here and mate, so the king has to keep coming forward. And now there's another discovered check. And then if the king keeps coming forward, it can't go back. If it keeps coming forward, then knight takes bishop is checkmate. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that the rook has skewered the queen to the king because white's king is checkmated first. Actually, if we back up a little bit, the best move in this position was blocking with the queen, but then after everything is traded out, it's a winning position for something like this would happen. It's just a winning position for black, with black being a piece up and black being ready to trade everything out on the f3 square, leaving him with an extra piece in the endgame. So that's all over. Let's go back to the game. He actually didn't play rook g1. Let's see, we're on move 35, and it may be that well, both sides are probably low on time. There's probably a time control at 40 moves, and so they're blitzing out those moves. I think that was the sequence that Petrosian was expecting. So when Horowitz played bishop h5, he went ahead with knight f2 anyway. But actually, bishop h5 was a big mistake because the queen can just come in here. That's mate in one, and so Horowitz overlooked that, and Petrosian overlooked that too. But he probably had already had this idea in mind. This also leads very quickly to a mate. Let's see, if the rook takes the knight, then you have the check here, and then that's mate because the queen can come into the g1 square defended by the rook. And let's see, if the king moves, then we can go into a similar situation with the discovered check this way. Let's see, is that the best move there? Maybe discovered check this way is even stronger because it opens up this file for the queen to come in and mate. Yeah, that's probably the best way to do it. So anyway, that was game over. Horowitz resigned after knight f2 check. So hope you guys enjoyed that one. That was kind of fun, a fun ending, and just shows the ways that strong players will use these pawn breaks. So let's take a look at another example game. The next game I wanted to show you was played between Savielly Tartakover and August Conrad Haide. It was played in 1925 in Marienbad. And Tartakover with the white pieces starts off with c4, the English opening, and Haide plays b6, the English defense to the English opening. So interesting way to play, and actually fairly modern looking. So let's continue. Yeah, they both sides develop their knights and fianchetto their bishops. In fact, black is going to go for a double fianchetto here. And so it starts to look a bit like a symmetrical English with both sides pushing their c-pawns forward. And now there's the other bishop being fianchettoed. So pretty normal opening so far. And white decides to trade off the dark squared bishop. This is often a really powerful bishop on this diagonal, so it's handy to get rid of it or to have that possibility. Queen steps up, And now Tartakover shows the first signs of wanting to play a pawn break. He's interested in this pawn break here, pushing the b pawn forward. It's going to take a little more setup because the knight is covering that square at the moment. So black centralizes his rooks and white pushes on with a3, preparing b4. And now first he throws in the bishop exchange and pushes on with b4. So here's the pawn break. And once again, black is confronted with that choice of whether to take or to keep the tension. He's not too worried about the pawn coming forward again in this case. The knight would have to relocate, but it would close up the queen side. Black would probably be happy with that and look to play on the king side. So that's not a big concern in this case. If he takes here, then white will take back with the pawn in this case, obviously because it's protected by the knight, so he doesn't want to sacrifice the exchange there. That's not justified. But this position looks pretty good for white. White now has the idea of pushing this pawn forward and creating a weak backwards pawn here on a7 that white can target with a rook. So and in the meantime, even before that pawn is pushed, white is controlling all of these squares in front of the two pawns, so looks like a good position for white. So black declined to exchange there and instead played knight to d4. So putting the knight on a good square and getting out in advance of this pawn push to b5 in case that's what white chooses to do. But that's not white's plan. First, white plays e4. So now we have possibility of pawn breaks over on this side as well. Let's see, black maneuvers with his knight, and then Tartakover takes. So he left the tension there for a little bit, but then he decided to exchange and open up this b file for his rook. So black does something interesting here. He doesn't take back right away, but he first throws in this knight exchange, which can be done with tempo because that's a check. And then he takes back with the d pawn. So both sides got something out of this exchange. Black is looking at this b pawn on the half-open file and maybe thinking to weaken it by pushing the a pawn forward. That's maybe an idea here. And white immediately has pressure on the center pawn, the d pawn in the center there on d3. So both sides got something out of that. Tartakover immediately plugs up that line by putting his knight on a good square. And his opponent starts to bring his knight around as well. That is coming to this good square as well. So both knights will get to a good location. The bishop steps out of the way. This is in advance of a potential knight coming here, but it's also stepping out of the way of this pawn push. So there is another pawn break being hinted at here with the bishop stepping back out of the way of the f-pawn. Let's see, knight to c6 was played, so the knight is continuing on its route to this square, and Tartakover goes immediately for the pawn break. So he's played pawn breaks on both sides of the board. He's got potential on both sides. I guess he just didn't feel like there was enough to just continue on one side of the board, and he wanted to create some play on the other side as well. So black continues with his plan, puts the knight on a good square. And well, let's just back up for a second. I did want to mention here that actually e takes f4 was playable here. This is it's kind of interesting. This is the kind of situation where it looks good for white, but it seems like black can hold this position if you believe the chess engine. I wouldn't be unhappy to play this position with white. I think that looks pretty good. And this bishop can maybe sneak into the game along this diagonal. I mean, the queen is covering it at the moment, but maybe after a rook lift, the bishop could come there, get on a better, more active diagonal. Seems like it might be a fine position for white, but it also seems to be okay for black, as I said, if you believe the chess engine. So anyway, black just continued with his own plan of knight to d4. And now rook to b2. The rook is lifted so it may swing across to the king side at an opportune time. And black plays with f6, shoring up the center. And at this point, Tartakover took this opportunity to open up the f-file by taking. So his pawn break has accomplished his purpose. Not only did it open up the f-file, and there can be some exchanges there, but it also opened up this diagonal for the queen as well, and we'll see that happening right away. In fact, Tartakover takes and then gets the queen out immediately. And the queen is coming with a threat on this pawn, so it's an active placement of the queen, and it's with tempo. Once again, the position is still about even if you believe the chess engine, but it looks to be like white has got some more ideas in this position than black. Anyway, let's continue on with the game. Queen d6 to defend that pawn. a4, preparing possibly to push here if needed to undermine this pawn. So black puts a stop to that by immediately playing, oh, well, he takes first, I'm sorry. Bishop takes was played. Then queen to f6. Yeah, this was an interesting choice. Let's back up to this position. This was not forced, but black was looking at the possibility here of going into an endgame where he has a good knight against a bad bishop, because you see this bishop is locked up behind the pawn chain at the moment, and so he just goes for this. He takes the knight and offers the queen trade, and Tartakover takes him up on the queen trade. So black has this position that he wanted, which is the good knight versus bad bishop. But, well, this bishop is not all that bad. For one thing, this pawn can move forward at the moment, and then the bishop would have a lot of scope on that long diagonal. And secondly, this is a passed pawn, so this always has to be kept under lock and key, as Nimzovich would say. Anyway, black needs to take great care about this pawn in the endgame. So while black got some advantages out of this, I think this position is definitely easier for white to play. So white pushed on with h4. He's going to soften up things on the queen side over here. Once again, he has the idea of playing on both sides of the board. h6 is played, bishop to e4. Rook maneuvers back. And it seems like black has kind of run out of ideas. That the rook was kind of going back and forth. And now, yeah, this is the moment. I thought this happened earlier in the game. At this point, white decides to try and create some more play by pushing this pawn again, and black decides to stop it by pushing that pawn. And he's doing it at a moment when his b pawn is protected by the rook. So he has a pretty tidy and compact arrangement here. It looks like he can hold on, but it's maybe not the most active position for black. Anyway, white switches the rook back to attack this pawn, which will keep this rook tied up for the moment. And then brings his king up and starts trying to create a weakness over on the king side. So black pushes a pawn too, and we get these trades. Now the pawns are gone, and the purpose of opening up these files over here on the king side, we'll see, is immediately exploited by the rook coming over here. The rook wants to penetrate to the back rank and then either attack black's pawns or maybe help this pawn promote. Anyway, just getting a more active position for that rook. And notice that white cleverly played this sequence at a time when black can't oppose rooks here and try and force a trade. And maybe that wouldn't have worked anyway, because if black went here, white could always go here and the rook can't come back to oppose. But in any case, it's not playable to oppose at the moment. So let's see, the king dropped back to h6, but the rook gets all the way into black's camp here, going to g8. The king goes up. The king is now kind of sidelined here. It's stuck against the wall by that rook, although the rook will have to let it go if it wants to do something active over here. So black is just kind of marking time there, and white starts to bring his king over. King steps up to h4. The rook goes to d8, looking to help this pawn promote. The knight comes into c2. It's going to maneuver with the knight a bit here. Rook check is played. King goes to g4. That was to shield this king from rook checks. And then the rook checks again. King goes back to h4, and the king drops back to g1. So getting away from knight checks, I guess. The knight goes to e3 anyway. Bishop goes to g2. This is interesting. It looks like maybe there'll be some idea of pinning that bishop and winning it by black, although at the moment this is covered. But let's see, knight to g4 is played here. The rook goes to d8. As I said, threatening or maybe preparing to push that pawn forward. And the king went to g3. I think there was some idea here of lining up the rook like this behind the king, and then the knight coming over here. And also this king is now freed. It's no longer against the wall. But it seems like this was actually the fatal mistake. It's been a little bit better for white for a while now, but the chess engine thinks that white could live here. I mean, black could survive the rest of this game if black were to play a pawn sack at this point. e4. Then bishop takes. And knight to e3. Bishop going back to g2. And then king to g4. It's interesting that rook here doesn't work at this moment because, it doesn't win a piece because white can check the king and drive it in front of the rook, so the bishop can unpin itself at that point. So there's no way for for black to win material there. Anyway, so king g4, this is the computer line, and rook g8 check. So it just seems to be a position where it's difficult for white to advance this pawn, even though white is a pawn up and maybe could win this just by arranging a exchange of all the minor pieces, but maybe it's a little hard for white to do that. Anyway, it seems that the chess engine doesn't find a way to win in that position. However, so that was playing e4 right here. However, black played king g3. And there's a fatal flaw with this move, which is it's getting too far away from this potential passed pawn. And Tartakover seizes on this immediately, pushes the pawn forward, and now rook to g6, setting up this somewhat kind of a threat here. There's maybe a threat there. It would take a couple moves to realize. Tartakover just moves the bishop out of the way immediately. Let's see, the rook goes to g7 now. That pawn was coming forward in any case, I guess, so it's looking for a better square to stop it at. Now the king steps over to f1, the king comes back to f4, king comes up to e2, the king goes over to g5. So the king is walking in trying to help out, but the pawn goes on to d7, just one step away from queening. The knight comes in. So I think this was the idea, being able to win that pawn with rook and knight. But Tartakover has an answer for this. He plays bishop to c6, so it's defended for the moment. King steps up to g6, king goes to e3, and the king goes back to g5. The problem here is, oops, let's get back to that position. The problem here is that if the king steps forward, it shields the rook's view of that pawn. White can just move the rook out of the way and promote that pawn. So that's not going to be not going to go well, or he could either do that or win, and black could sacrifice the knight to stop the pawn, but that would be winning for white as well. So this is big trouble for white, or for black in this situation. The king goes back to g5, and Tartakover plays rook to c8, and black just resigns because this is a tricky move, but if the knight takes here, the rook will come up here and pin the knight, and so that will win a piece. So, and there's nothing to stop that pawn from coming forward. So that was the win for white there. Nice play, and good example of using those pawn breaks to create play on both sides of the board, and then switching back and forth from one side to the other to try and create chances. Okay, that's it for this video. In the next video, I'm going to show some more examples of modern grandmasters employing pawn breaks in their games. So see you then. Bye.